Hello everybody, my guest today is Roy Vaughn. I refer to him as RV. Roy is my grandpa, RV is my grandpa. RV was the executive director at the University of Texas Alumni Center, the Texas X's. He was with the organization for 33 years. I believe 19 of those he was executive director. We talk a lot about his time at the Texas X's. We talk a lot about just sort of the core tenets of good leadership, both in nonprofit and in a for-profit world. We talk about the complexity of raising a family while also being committed to your career. We talk about the transition that he took into retirement and the importance he placed on having a succession plan, the importance of having a board, a personal board of directors, a professional board of directors. We cover a lot of ground. So with that, I hope you enjoy this conversation with my grandpa, RV, Roy Vaughn. She was a switchboard operator at Sears.
Yeah.
How did the switchboard work then?
You call Sears and you want to talk to hardware.
Oh, I see. So there was a main switchboard operator that would patch you through to Sears.
Yeah.
And then the Sears
and
switchboard.
come to think of it, it was Mom was a switchboard operator when she met Dad, so that would have been in the 30s. So from the 30s to the...
Much later.
Yeah.
Yeah. 30s to probably, what, 40s?
Yeah, maybe even the 50s.
No kidding. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Because you see movies from the 50s or about the 50s. And
yeah,
that's
like, this is an old-time phone.
Right.
I remember when this was the state of the art.
Right. But that was post switchboard operating.
Yeah.
That was when you could direct dial somebody.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so our challenge here, RV, is going to be, when I came to visit you last week, I got to your house at 11:15 or so, last Friday, and you got home at about 11:30.
Yeah.
And we talked from 11:30 all the way through the day, through 2 meals.
And I couldn't tell you what we talked about.
I couldn't either. And we got to like 11:30 at night before we finally said, okay, we need to hang it up.
Yeah.
So somehow we got to take what normally takes us 12 hours to have a conversation and abbreviate it to an hour.
Well, I imagine I danced around a bit.
Those are the best conversations, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I found doing this, is that the more structured it is, the less genuine it feels to me.
Yeah.
And if it feels like a produced thing to me, like a staged interview where I've got questions that I want to read through, it doesn't flow as much. It's not as enjoyable of a conversation to me doing it that way. It takes you out of it almost. You agree?
Yeah, and it's too easy to. It'd be when you do set questions, you're really steering it. You're affecting the outcome of the conversation.
Yeah, because you bake your own biases into those questions. You bake what you think the answerer is going to say so that you know what you're going to say in response.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's less organic.
And if he doesn't say that, well, then you've got another question to get him back.
Right. Yeah, how can I steer this back on topic?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that...
I think they call those spin doctors.
Right. Yeah. And a good interviewer, I think, to a certain extent, has the ability to recognize, okay, we did have a point that we wanted to get out of this person, and we veered too far from it. And they can not only steer the conversation back to where they intended it to go, but they can also remember to circle back to whatever rabbit trail they had if it was interesting later on.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do. It's something I underappreciated being a consumer of interviews and not a person that puts them together, is that it's when you see a good interviewer, they're likely good at it intentionally.
Yeah.
And they're having to be really intensely present mentally and be able to block everything else out and just be dialed in with the person that they're talking to, but while also thinking through the lens of the viewer, what's this person going to see? What are they going to hear? How's it going to present to them?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I wrote down 8 questions as things that I would just want to talk to you about, but I want them to kind of all focus around your life growing up and your sort of the intertwining of you, the family man, and you, the professional. Because in my memory of you from being a boy, you did that really well. Like family was always an emphasis. We were there right in your front yard, so I got to be raised with you and with B. The version of your marriage that I remember was very focused on family, very family oriented. Holidays were a big thing. Everybody came to your house. But I also remember when did you retire?
In 96, I think.
96. So I remember in the latter stages of your career having occasions to go into the Alumni Center and see you interact with people around that building. And so I got to see there's a version of you that operates professionally in a certain way and operates at home in a certain way. How in the world do you balance, or did you balance those two things?
No, I didn't. If I was going to go back and do it again, I'd be at home a lot more. I left at 7 in the morning and came home 7 at night.
Yeah.
And you know, you're never going to finish for the day in that kind of work, and you got to stop at some point and come home. But no, B really raised the kids. I didn't have that much influence on them as she did.
Yeah. So you were at Texas Exes for 26 years?
33 years.
33 years. And you didn't start as executive director there?
No, I was there 13 years before I was director.
I didn't realize it was that long. You were there 13 years. So you were, what, 20 years?
And you know the interesting thing,
Executive director?
I don't know that I ever thought of this before. I had more impact on the association and the direction it took before I was director than I did when I was director.
Why?
I don't know. I guess because I didn't have the overall responsibility and the regular administrative kind of things you do, and because it was organizing chapters,
Mm-hmm.
and it was. And I realized early on that we'd go form a chapter, and they'd say, "Well, what do we do?" Well, you have a meeting on or about March 2nd, and you have a speaker from the campus, and you sing the Eyes of Texas and burp and go home. That's not enough to hold it together. Is that there's got to be some reason. I didn't realize that. I think it was an epiphany to me to realize that just because people are volunteers, that doesn't mean that they don't expect compensation. So giving them recognition, putting their name on a program or a scholarship is compensation. Mm. There's a need there that you're fulfilling.
Yeah.
And that became scholarships. Is now they've got their eyes out for kids that are bright and making sure they're aware the University of Texas exists. So I remember the way that happened the first time that the head of the biology department came over and said, "There's a kid in Lufkin that's doing graduate level research, and he's a sophomore in high school, and we need to get him here." I don't even remember his name. But I went to Lufkin and went to the pharmacist and said, who's the, if I say Texas Exes, who's the person that comes first to your mind? We had a regent that lived in Lufkin. I don't remember his name now. But I thought that's who he was going to say, and that's who I was going to go see. But he mentioned a lady that was PR for Lufkin Industries, and she was really a hotshot person. And they organized a club, and I told her what we need to do is get this kid to be aware of the University of Texas. And she said, well, let's go see the regent. And we did. And I don't remember how we went around asking him. Really what we were doing was asking him if he'd put up a scholarship.
Uh-huh.
And he said, I'll do it if you can match it. And I said, we'll match it. I didn't have, that was $500. I didn't have $500 in my budget. But I went back and had to convince Jack. That was the beginning of the club scholarships. But you know, local people, particularly in a town the size of Lufkin, they knew who this kid was. And so it was now you get volunteers that interview people for scholarships, and that became part of the compensation. Man, if you could be on the scholarship committee and you could decide who got the money.
Right. Now you have a more meaningful role.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was prior to you mentioned Jack McGuire.
Yeah.
He was executive director prior to you, correct?
Right.
So you ran those programs and started the scholarship sort of model.
We had a scholarship for the Methodist ministry. We had one or two scholarships that had been there forever.
Yeah.
But that would have been in the middle 1960s. Mm-hmm. And last year they gave away $5 million in scholarships.
Wow. Across how many scholarships?
Who knows? I don't know how to count them.
Yeah.
But I think about 20 of them are full ride scholarships, including a year abroad. And so that grew.
Yeah.
But you know, if you're a nonprofit organization, if profit is not your bottom line, what's your bottom line? And your bottom line is, what is the exempt purpose of the organization? Well, education is one of those. And so I felt we had an obligation to do something that was beneficial to the institution. Scholarships certainly were. Mm-hmm. Finding bright students certainly were. And then from that, we started teaching awards and others. But before that, when Jack McGuire took it over, 13 years before I started, the association was practically non-existent. When I interviewed, it was in the basement of the home economics building. You couldn't find it. When I got to campus and said, where's the ex-students association, they didn't know.
So it hasn't always been right there by the stadium?
No.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
It didn't have any visibility. It's down the side strips on the home economics building is not the most famous building on the campus.
Sure.
And the basement of the home economics building was no place.
Huh.
And so big change.
Yeah.
And if I couldn't have done any of that had I not been able to stand on Jack's shoulders.
Yeah.
A membership program with a budget.
So you were there for 13 years prior to taking over as executive director.
Right.
During your 13-year tenure prior to that move, were you thinking about what the next generation of the association was going to be all about?
I don't think so.
So you were just looking at it as the job is the job, and you weren't thinking that zoomed out.
It was exciting to get that. I can remember the first time we had a club officers conference, and we had people coming from all over the state that I'd gone around, just had coffee with or lunch, and occasionally go by when they had an event going on and all that. Now they're all coming, and they filled a whole big room, and they started swapping ideas. And it was exciting to watch it happen.
Yeah.
That was viability. Before that it was just 8 or 10 employees.
Right.
And we had a mailing list. The records that we had were on 3x5 cards in filing cabinets. And for every one of those cards, we had an addressograph plate. There was a machine that took a rack of these and it cranked them in addressed envelopes at about this rate. You're sending 100,000 pieces. It's an addressograph. Now they move, and you got to go in and get their card and make the change,
Right.
and change their addressograph plate, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we've talked a lot in previous conversations about sort of the evolution of Texas Exes over the time that you were there, because you were there long prior to computers becoming a thing.
Oh, yeah.
But then you got to see sort of the genesis of the computer generation and caught that wave early.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? What was that like? And were you automatically, when you first became aware of computers, was your brain already thinking through, like, how can we use this at the association, or was it just, a novelty?
Well, it was just it gave you opportunities that you didn't have. When we had the addressograph plates, and I'd go to Lufkin, could you give me a printout of all the Texas X's that live in Lufkin? Hell no, there was no card file that said, here's Lufkin.
Right.
You couldn't do it. And now changing addresses. The first generation that I can remember went to punch cards. And to change an address, you had a different punch card, and you put a whole rack of cards instead of the addressographs, and instead of going like this, it went, and that was something else. The speed.
That was state of the art.
Yeah.
So then when Macintosh came out with computers, you made a decision at that point to start to implement them in the association, not even really knowing what value they were going to bring at the time, no?
I had a pretty good inkling that was going to be the future. And we had a girl that came by from Apple, and the box was a little. I think it was the first iMac, but it was about a foot square, and she could do things like she'd punch these things, and there was a rabbit on there, and then she'd move something, and there were a whole bunch of rabbits on there. That's good.
Huh.
So I made the decision when we were going to go. I was also aware that people that were on PCs were nerds.
Mm.
You didn't have a staff. If you had a staff member that was on a PC, that's all they did. They were the computer operator. And if I wanted some output from that, I had to go to that person.
Mm.
Where the Apple, I could do it.
Yeah. That was the Macintosh, Macintosh 1 and Macintosh 2.
And I had several employees tell me, by several, there were 3 I can think of, that said they didn't want to be on computers. They wanted to stay with their typewriter. And Lorraine Jackson she had been there 20 some odd years by then, and she said, "Roy, I'm going to retire. I'm not going to get on a computer." And there were all kind of reactions to this, so I bought 2 of them, and I gave them to 2 employees and said, "Here, just take this home and play with it. Do your church work on there, do whatever." And they'd come back saying, "Boy, let me tell you what I did." Really? You like that damn thing?
Uh-huh. And then you come up with ideas of how you
Yeah,
can
and Apple
use it.
told me that I was the first office in Austin that ever remember the staff was on a Macintosh.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Huh.
And Lorraine retired, and that was when we were going to do a cookbook, and we needed somebody to keep up with the recipes and who the testers were and what their test results were. And so I got one employee to take the computer out to Lorraine's house and do it for her and get her on it, and she loved it.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Upon retirement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about, so when you're leading a nonprofit, I don't know, maybe this is the case with for-profit businesses too, but it seems like nonprofits have a more acute understanding of the impact they can make generationally, whereas a business is a little more, like a for-profit business is a little more focused on the immediate product or service they can deliver. When you're making decisions as a nonprofit leader, are you thinking about the generational impact it's going to have, or what your successor in a job is going to be inheriting from you? Or is there just not enough time to think that far in advance?
Well, I don't think it's the time to do it. I don't think I was that perceptive.
Yeah.
I think I pretty much, it was pretty much a building process of what can I do with the number of people and the number of dollars we have that would make a difference. I can remember going through that process on teaching awards. You know, I was very aware. See, well, this is during the 60s. If you remember during the 60s, there was a whole generation of people that says don't trust anybody over 30. Alumni, their minds, all alumni are over 30s. So when you graduate, do you want to be a part of that or not? No, you don't.
Yeah, it's not exciting.
Membership was tough for people just coming out. Well, it struck me that if the people that did join and were avid alumni, I'd go have coffee with them and they'd tell me about their time on campus. And it meant something to them. And the kids that were in school now, the only thing they're doing is having demonstrations. And we didn't have any program about demonstrations. And so I realized that if they're ever going to give a damn about the school or give a dime to the school, it was going to be how do they regard their experience on campus. And I went through school, so I knew I had good professors and I had professors. So we started teaching awards. And man, did we have a conflict within the school, because the school academicians were all about tenure and rising in the ranks of academia. And if there was a guy they were going to fire because they didn't like the way he was teaching, but the kids liked him, and he got a teaching award, now how hard is it to fire him?
Right. It introduces merit into a job that is opposed to
I got
merit.
called to the president's office.
Huh.
Because we'd given an award, and we let the students not only nominate, they were the selection
Right.
committee. So there are two types of alumni associations. The rarest type are the ones that are self-governed. Another word for that is independent. And independent was not a word that academicians liked. I could tell you war stories about whether it's independent or not. Baylor, the president of Baylor kicked the Alumni Association off campus and dissolved it because it was independent. And so there was always a big part of my job was having presidents be comfortable with us being self-governed.
Why would they have an aversion to that, though?
Well, that was one reason. There was an article in a magazine that was going to come out that the that somebody within the university thought was detrimental to the university, and the president asked me that they wanted to see that article before it was published. And I really didn't have any choice. I had a choice. I could have been you and the mule you rode in on, but I took it up there in a manila envelope, and I said, here's the rough draft. But if you open it, I'll resign. Why would you resign from that? Well, it's because you don't have a trust, and I haven't done my job of building the trust that we're here to praise, promote, and protect the University of Texas, not be adverse to it. And she now had the envelope. Well, now we haven't had that many women presidents. I kind of let the cat out of the bag.
Huh.
But she had the envelope. And she had to either give it back to me or call my bluff.
Right.
And she handed it back to me. And that was a tough moment.
Yeah, ultimately that builds an additional layer of trust.
Yeah.
If you don't take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Talk about after being at a place for 33 years, how did you know it was time to go?
That trust was not just the president, it was the deans and even the department heads, all the administration had to have that kind of trust. And it was not only the trust, some of them wanted to have their own alumni association, all the business school graduates.
Oh.
So it was a money deal. And so it was the deans, and I had a close working relationship with all the deans. But I realized they were all getting old. And if I had to predict when they're going to resign, it's going to be in the next 5 years or so. And I thought, I wonder how much longer I'm going to stay here. And what I didn't want to happen was that all the deans would change, and then my new guy would be behind me, and he'd be the new kid on the block. And he'd be at a disadvantage, and that if I could get my replacement in here now, I'd have him welcoming the new deans when they came on, and he was the leader of the block, and it worked like a charm.
He would have already been established by the time the new people got there, and they would see him as somebody that's like a stalwart. They've already been there.
They
that's
looked to him for advice and help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old were you when you retired?
Well, I retired in 96 and born in 31, so I don't know how old that is.
Math is hard. What is that, 64?
Yeah, it was about the time.
Something like that, 65?
Yeah. I didn't feel like I was worn out, or it was when I went to the guy that was the president then, I said, I've got to explain to you why I think I'm going to retire, because they didn't take it well. People tend to resist change anyway, and that's a pretty big change. And his comment was, your radar went off. And I guess that's what it was. I became aware this is the time to do it, make the move for the benefit of the association. It's ironic. I've been gone from there all that time, and I'm going back there today to still meddle with it.
Yeah, with some of the staff that you worked with when you were there. Yeah. Talk about Carol Barrett and your experiences with Carol, because you worked together with Carol prior to being executive director, did you not?
I guess you could say I worked with her. We clashed like you wouldn't believe. she, I needed an assistant, and they hired Carol as a typist, and she really couldn't type all that well. She wasn't the fastest typist there. And one of the early conversations I had with her, she asked me a question, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Don't call me ma'am. I'm not an old guy like you." It was clash. And when I was interviewing to be director, there was another guy on the staff, a new guy. He was in the position that I started in, and he was good. But he decided he was going to make a go for director as well. He was a candidate. And Carol actively supported him, which was a kind of a stupid thing to do because you got to win.
Yeah.
And everybody thought the first thing I'd do would be to fire Carol. It was that well known that we just didn't jive good. But when Carol was in charge of events, and when she put on an event, it just felt right in every way. Everybody left there with a really good feeling. She was really a talented person. I admired that. But also, by then she was working with a travel program, and she wanted to do she got pretty cocky about picking the tours. Well, my responsibility was to decide how big was the tour program going to be, and I let her have some leeway in picking from a palette of tours. And she wanted to do a tennis tour. There was a guy in New Braunfels that was a tennis star, and she had some acquaintance with him, and she wanted to do a tennis tour to the Wimbledon. And we spent a lot of money promoting it. We had to find a company that would do the logistics of it. We spent a lot of time and money on the tour, and it didn't make. So we lost all that money. If we'd have gone with a planned tour, you wouldn't have had any of that expense. Well, I had never done any management, but I was reading management books, and you had to do a performance evaluation. And so I was going to do a performance evaluation on Carol. And she was, when I called her in, she was sure she was going to get fired. I just know I was going to get fired. I could read it in all of them. I asked her about that tour, and I asked her why she thought it didn't go. And she gave me some really good reasons, and I said, "Boy, you learned a lot from that. You probably deserve a raise, so this is going to be your new salary." And it shocked her. I could tell on her face. She wasn't really shaking her head. I thought I was going to get fired, and I got a raise. And from then on, we kind of warmed up. Well, fast forward now, I've been out away from there for years and years, and COVID came along, and the new director, this is 3 directors from me. And he was talking to his wife, and he says, the Alumni Center can't be open during COVID, but I think we ought to go down there and stand by the door, and if some exes come, just let them know we're there. And when he got there was Carol Barrett. And that's who she is.
Yeah.
And she just finished 50 years there.
50 years.
Yeah.
Is she the longest tenured employee in the association's history?
Yeah.
Will that ever be beat?
It's going to be tough.
Be a tough one.
Yeah.
You'd have to start early and be committed to it over a long haul.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. There's one there now that I got my eyes on that sure would make a good director.
That might make it.
And she just graduated a couple of years ago, and
yeah, I'm excited to meet her. Talk about, I had asked you about balancing parenting and professional life. you don't do yourself enough justice in saying you didn't do a good job of parenting, because
I worked 80-hour weeks.
But I see the product, right?
Yeah.
I see my two uncles and my dad. I see
Yeah.
the importance they place on family, and I can recognize that that's not something you just arrive at. Like, you're raised to have that sort of importance on family.
Yeah.
But when you're also committed to what you're doing professionally, and you're having to try to figure out what the balance is, there comes this point at the end of your career where you hang spurs up, and then day one of post-work life starts. Did you prepare for what that day was going to look like prior to your first day of retirement, or did you just sort of go from this day I'm at Texas X's and this day I'm not, and such is life, it moves on?
Well, for one thing, the booby prize was I got to spend the summers in Colorado at the cabin for the first time. Not 2 weeks, not 3 weeks, but the whole summer. So that wasn't all bad.
That wasn't a hard transition.
No,
Yeah.
it didn't come into play. I worked. I did a really, really good, probably the best job I did the whole time I was there was guiding the transition from me to Boone. And I really did that well. So when I walked out of the Alumni Center for the last time, I didn't look back.
Do you remember walking out for the last time?
Yeah,
Did you recognize at the time this is the last time?
Yeah.
You did.
very consciously.
Yeah. But you felt good about it because you had spent the time with your successor and knew it was in good hands.
You know, they hired him contingent on keeping me on for a year.
I was going to ask that. What was the overlap
Yeah,
period?
within a month, I could tell you that I should have gone to him and said, "You're wasting your money."
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Huh. Did you stay the whole year?
yeah,
You did.
yeah. I had a piece of furniture that was built for a computer. I've still got it at home, and that was my office.
And you gave him the big desk?
Yeah, probably everybody that would take the job has got their own ego and their own personal preferences. And I had my desk out in the open, and he built a man cave.
Yeah.
There was that much difference.
Yeah.
And I'm still interested in the place.
That building, it'd be hard to explain why personalities get captured in buildings, or just the feeling you get when you enter a building or a room that's set up a certain way.
Well, coming from the basement of the home economics building
Anything's an improvement.
to a building,
Right.
and see, I came on when there were just shacks where that building stood now. Shacks built during the war.
Like homes?
No, just classrooms,
Oh.
but prefab buildings, and it was, and so I got to help raise the money, and I had input on the design, and then when we expanded it, well, I had full input from that.
Huh.
That's when I worked with Charles Moore, and it was the best time I had.
Yeah, that walking in that building even now, I think I went there last probably 4 or 5 years ago. That building still has the feeling that it had walking into it as a boy. There's so much nostalgia about that building, and there's so many, I guess, design elements from that building that were incorporated in, like, your old house on the farm or the cabin.
Yeah.
So it just has a feeling of home to me
Yeah.
in a weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. So back to that notion of, back to you transitioning from professional life to post-professional life. You are somebody that I know does those transitions well. Like, you used to always, at the end of the summer in Colorado, there was an excitement for you to come back home to Texas, even though you were going to be coming back to heat and all that. You always made transitions really well. Talk about your process that you go through when you know a transition's coming.
I made lists. I had about a month before I knew I was going to come home, I started thinking about what's going to be the highlight of getting back, and I put it on my list. And as time got closer, I got to where I couldn't wait to leave because I wasn't leaving something, I was going to something.
Right.
It was a big difference. I didn't have the feeling, I didn't get all welled up and say, well, God, the cabin's closed and it's over and it won't come back. I said, let's get home.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd do the same thing going the other way. Of course, I had a place in the house, and that house we had in that middle bedroom in one corner were things that were going to Colorado. And we never went that the car wasn't packed. You couldn't put a deck of cards in there.
I remember.
Going and coming.
Usually with a trailer behind it that was also full.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did that same concept apply to transitioning professionally? Like you start making a list of the things that you're excited to do when you don't have to report into the office anymore?
No, I was consumed in how the transition was going to work.
Yeah.
And you know that I would bet you that if you ask the guy who was coming in as president, the last president that I worked with, if you'd ask him who he relied on most on the campus, he'd tell you the alumni director. I mean, we nailed it. I had a what do you call a spy that's in a group?
Like a mole?
A mole. I had a mole in the president's selection committee. And when they took a break, they decided who they're going to pick, and they took a break about some details of it. And he called me on the phone and says, "This is going to be," and I said, "I'm going to call him." And he just waited an hour. And the guy was at Illinois, and 15 minutes after he was told he was picked for president, I had him on the phone.
You were calling
setting
him.
up an appointment.
Yeah.
And went to see him and took him a map and some paraphernalia, Austin paper, and when he made me an hour appointment, and I went up the night before and took him to dinner. So I had him and had his wife, and they had 100 questions that I could answer about the town, about this, about that.
You were the welcoming committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the next day I went for my appointment, and we spent the hour, and the yearly budget meeting followed my meeting. And the guy that succeeded him as president of the University of Texas was his number 2 guy at Illinois. And he came down and he said, "Bob, we're all ready." We'd gone over my allotted time. And he said, would you know how to run the meeting? You know what we're going to do it. I'm getting some information here I really need. And we talked for another hour. And I had him so, he couldn't wait to meet the people, because I said, you're going to have vice presidents, and you're going to have deans, and you're going to have department heads, and they all report to you. And there's a high degree of certainty that you're going to have some yes men in there. And when you get ready to make a mistake, they're going to let you make it. And I told him, not only do I not report to you, my officers don't either. And if you want to, I'll help you build a secret board of directors, that if you've got a big decision to make, that you want to talk to 5 or 6 people that are real leaders in the community, presidents of big corporations. You want to bounce it off of them, you can do it.
Yeah.
We had that set up.
The secret board of directors. is probably something I learned from you, or just like a personal board of directors.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be an official thing. It's just people that you know
Right.
are concerned for your development. They care about you as a person. They care about what you're doing, and they don't have a stake in the game.
I thought I invented that,
Huh.
but it sold it. It was he couldn't wait, and he and Boone were peas in the pod.
Yeah. That's cool. How long was Jim Boone there?
15 years.
Does he still, he went from the association to the scholarship program, did he not?
Yeah, he just raised. He became a fundraiser, and we're not the fundraising arm of the university. But because of that tightness, when Boone saw that I had a scholarship program that was I forget even now what we called it, but it was $10,000 scholarship. It was a good scholarship, and we had one out of every 10 boys and girls in the top part of their class in the state of Texas apply for that scholarship.
Wow.
I mean, there's a magnet. And Jim saw
One
that
scholarship?
as something to grow. And so he went to the president, same guy. What was the guy? It was the successor that came down to say, Bob, the meeting's about to start and you're not there. And so the universities put that as the top priority of their fundraising program for the year. The university's fundraising, not the ex-students' association.
Huh.
And so he was able to get matching money for that. And so he could see the potential in it. And Jim was a 3 handicap golfer when he played. And I'll guarantee you his handicap went way down as long as he was director. I teased him about this. He resigned as director to raise money for that scholarship and play golf. He played golf with everybody he got the money from.
Does he still work, or is he retired
No, I don't
now?
think so. I haven't talked to him since he retired.
Yeah. Okay, so in every group that you've been associated with, we talked about this when I came to your house last week. The longer you spent with that group, the higher you would rise in ranks, and eventually you would become the leader of that group.
Yeah,
Why?
I think I was bragging a little bit. I think I was counting my blessings.
No, well, maybe, but that's the reality I perceived. Why is that the case?
I
Why?
always felt like a real measure. The people you couldn't fool were your peers. You couldn't con your peers. They could spot you a mile away. And so I think I was real glad that happened, that I'd get to be president of the alumni, helped start an alumni group of directors of just independent, self-governed associations, not the others that were really fundraisers. They were really not running an alumni program. And even to the master gardeners, or
Bat Conservation Society.
yeah, it's a thing to be sad. I get a lot of satisfaction from that.
What is that? What is the characteristic of a person that would cause them to find themselves in a group and
I
then find
expect it's
themselves
trust.
leading it? Trust.
Yeah, trust to me is more important than loyalty. Sometimes loyalty, you can get yes people from loyalty, but trust is when they know you got their back, and they'll do what they need to do because you want them to do it. And I always called it an inverted pyramid. Instead of a leader at the top, down hierarchy, you flip the pyramid and you're at the bottom, and you provide you empower, you give them what they need to do their job.
Yeah.
And not micromanage it. We at the Ex-Students Association, we had one policy. It was policy number one was don't let a dumb policy get in the way of a good decision. You make a decision. You don't say, well, it's our policy that we do this. Because all a policy is figuring out what you'd do if. And the if is never always the same. But if you put it in a policy, it gets rigid. And it's hard to make a customer first with policies and procedures.
Boy, that's a good point. It's hard to make a good customer with bad policies. Yeah. So this year, your birthday's in October?
Yeah.
You'll be 93?
93.
In 93 years, let's say, when did you first consider yourself an adult? 20, 30, somewhere in there?
No, I don't think I feel grown up yet.
You're still working on it.
Yeah.
What does the future look like to you? Do you think a lot about the future, or how has how has your concept of the future changed as you've gotten older? Do you think about it differently now than you did when you were?
I think about it's when you go to bed at night, you're maybe not going to wake up in the morning. But I believe when you breathe your last breath, you see God. And so it's not hard to go to sleep.
No fears around that?
Yeah. Except Holly. I worry about Holly's going to want to get up in the morning. If I'm not there to take her off the bed, she's going to get pissed.
She'll be mad. Yeah. Okay, so I have one last question. When you look at the way the world looks today, and you compare it to the different phases of the world that you've seen in 93 years, we've talked a lot about how human beings are kind of hardwired to see threat and to see negativity, and it's a little easier to default to negativity than it is to be optimistic.
Yeah.
What makes you optimistic? What evidence do you see in the world that would make you be optimistic about the next 90 years?
Right now, it's hard to be optimistic about something. I'm more afraid of I don't remember who. I remember hearing a phrase that I can't tell you what the weapons of World War III will be, but the weapons of World War IV will be sticks and stones. It's a pretty precarious place right now. I think your generation, though, there's always been change. Technology's changed, transportation's changed, jobs changed, but the rate of change got to going fast. And I think your generation can handle the rate of change. And I'm optimistic about that. I think I'm optimistic enough that it doesn't take a genius to realize that war is a really, really wasteful thing. And what you may be fighting the war about is pretty damn trivial. It could be something that you could agree on if you had any good sense. If we talk about China and the United States blowing one another up, where are your customers going to be? It doesn't make sense to have a war, and I really do hope that there's enough leadership to get past that point.
Yeah. And it seems like that the characteristics of leadership don't change as much as the landscape that they're utilized in changes. Yeah. Like the core components of good leadership have been the core components of good leadership for a long time. They're just hard to put your finger on.
Yeah.
We've talked about books on leadership and how many of them there are, but how few of them are actually compelling and true and useful.
Yeah.
It's kind of something you figure out as you go, but the core tenets are the same. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I think when I became director, I probably thought more about what leadership was about than any time in my life. And I finally came to that leadership is helping people want to do what needs to be done. And that good leadership is, a good leader is a good follower, and sometimes the people with the best information are the best ones to make a decision whether they're the leader or not. And so you aren't a leader all the time. I think of it when I go to the doctor's office and the nurse comes and calls your name. I hold the door and I said, "I'll follow you. You know where we're going." And I think that's what I've tried to do.
It's good. It's you and I have had a pretty regular set cadence of visits. You know, about once a month we get together and we visit. It's been a really interesting thing to be what I would consider an adult version of myself, getting to know my adult grandpa on an adult level over the course of the last 5 years. We've been.
Has it been that long?
I think so, because we started it with the garden projects or the landscaping projects in Austin.
Yeah.
And I've now been in Bastrop County for 3 years, so it's been.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, 5 years of that frequency. But it's been. These are stories that I repeat all the time, and getting to tell people my visits with my grandpa. It's been really cool getting to know you on an adult level, and not just like grandson to grandpa. So.
You know, you're the only one that's ever called me grandpa.
I refer to you as my grandpa, but...
You know what? I guess that started with B. B didn't want to be called Nana, or she wanted to be called B. And that was, I was talking about Carol Barrett. Carol Barrett's the first one that called me RV.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And it stuck. She didn't want to call me Mr. Vaughn, and she didn't think she could get away with calling me Roy, so she called me RV. And all of my grandkids call me RV.
Yeah, it's all I've ever known you as.
Yeah.
That's good.
And then it was BRV.
Yeah.
And you know the business in a marriage, when they say you're coming as one, we really became one. They would call B BRV, and they'd call me BRV.
Yeah. When we referred to your house growing up, it was let's go to BRVs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks for being open to doing something like this on camera.
Fun.
Yeah, of all the conversations we've had, this is the first one we've actually produced into something. So
I wonder what this is going to be like.
That's good. We just did a full hour of it, so
yeah,
it goes by quick.
It is.
Yeah, thanks for doing it.
Good memories.
Yeah.